Hello, in this tutorial I will be explaining how you can publish your .NET Core applications using .NET Core CLI, which is command line interface. So I already have an application, wait a second, okay, and that is called New Program, which is a .NET Core application. And as you know that you can create projects using .NET CLI, which we have a command called .NET New. All right, so I assume that you already know all those things. So the first thing that you may want to look at when you publish .NET Core is that you are able to publish your .NET Core application in two ways. And the first one is called framework dependent way, and the second one is called self-contained. So, well, if you look at the definitions of those words, actually they are pretty self-explanatory. But let me explain. Let me briefly explain what they are. So the first thing is .NET framework dependent, meaning that your published application depend on the existence of the .NET Core on the target computer. So that means when you deploy your .NET Core application, the target machine should have or must have .NET Core framework installed. That has pretty much that has its own advantages and disadvantages. The first, some of the advantages are your deployment size. Your application will be smaller in size, and you don't have to deploy it like for several machines. You just deploy it once, and as long as the libraries are okay with that, your application will pretty much run everywhere. What I mean by your libraries is some libraries actually contain native code, or they depend on the native APIs of the operating system. For instance, like if you download a library, NuGet package, if you say, which depends on, let's say, Windows API, then you're not going to be able to use that library on other machines because it basically requires a Windows computer. So your application will be actually as portable as your libraries allow. So just keep that in mind. And yeah, so that was a disadvantage, but it's not really something what has to do with the framework dependent stuff. It's actual .NET Core stuff. So your application will be smaller in size. You can pretty much deploy everything everywhere, and so on, whatever. The other one is self-contained, and also when you run your application, when you deploy your application with the framework dependent way, that means you're gonna be using .NET Core CLI to be able to run your application. Since we don't really have like Windows or Windows Forms or WPF APIs in .NET Core, when you want to write some, the available APIs are like ASP.NET, ASP.MVC, and console applications, web API, and stuff like that. So it's pretty much like really independent from the platforms most of the time. But if you deploy your applications in a self-contained way, that means your application will contain .NET Core as well. So the target machine should not have or doesn't have to have the .NET Core installed. It also will produce executable files. So that means you don't have to use the .NET CLI to be able to run your applications. Really, you can just run them as a regular application through a command line or whatever. Like if you have web server, then yeah, you can use that to run your .NET Core, let's say MVC application, ASP.NET MVC applications. Okay, all things aside, let's go ahead and I'll show you how you do the actual both. So let's go ahead, and so I will already have this one. I'm just gonna use code editor, which is Visual Studio Code, to modify my .NET Core application. As you see, there's no bin or object folders. I've deleted them. I use the same example from our previous videos, but they were in Turkish, so this one will be in English. Okay, so let's make the font size a little bigger, which I cannot. but never mind. Okay, so again, this is from previous video. So you see there's a runtime identifier. I'm just going to remove it. I'm going to explain what that is later in the video. But so far, that's pretty much how you'll see your CS project file, which we have this target framework, which has to be there because what target framework you use is important. You have like .NET Core, App 2.0, 1.1, or you have like Net for 6.1, stuff like that. So it will tell you what packages available to you and what not. .NET Core API has a smaller API surface than .NET Framework because .NET Framework is a big one, real big, and the old one that pretty much just runs on Windows computers. So it's keep that in mind. So if you have this like that, let's go back to our program, and we have this .NET publish publish command, and we have this configuration flag, which is C, and you can say release. That means it's gonna be releasing it instead of, so it's not gonna produce libraries that are debug libraries. So that will be, release libraries are more optimized and do not have extra debug code in there. So let's go ahead and try that, and I'll just publish it. One thing though, well, let me actually show you what it's published, and then I'm just going to explain that one thing. So go to bin. As you see, it's release we're talking about, and .NET Core App is the framework. And let's see what we have here. All right, so we have this new program.dll, and that's the published thing. Of course, if you go to publish, you'll see the same thing like new program and all those sort of things. So in order to be able to run this application, which is .NET new program.dll, but notice that it is not new program.exe, which is for Windows, but in Mac, I'm using Mac, it doesn't really have any extension. But it has .dll, which means it is framework dependent. In order to produce like executable files, like without a DLL extension, then you need to be doing the self-contained publishing. I'll show you how that works. So in order to be able to run this, as you see, I say .NET, and now it works, .NET. But if I do this, well, it doesn't mean much to, and it doesn't know what that is. It doesn't know what that is because it doesn't know what runtime it requires to be running this. So when I say .NET, I say, hey, .NET, use your runtime to run this application. So let's go back. And of course, you can use multiple .NET frameworks. So if you say target framework that is singular, as you see, you are allowed to just enter one .NET target framework. But if you say target frameworks, then you can use a semicolon and then specify multiple versions. So let's say .NET 6.1, actually 6.1. You can look at the .NET documentation to see what available target frameworks are there and how you need to write them. Well, they're magic strings, so that's how you remember it. Never mind. So let's go back to our publishing, and if I run the same command, of course I need to go back. See, where am I? One more. All right, now if I say .NET publish, or actually, yeah, publish, same command I'm gonna use. Not gonna change anything. You see we get an exception. It tells me the current project targets multiple frameworks. Please specify the framework for the published application. So that means I need to be passing another flag, which is called f. And I can say net for one, never mind, 461. All right, so let's say framework to resolve this. The framework version. Okay, so the beauty of it is, as I said before, .NET Framework 6.1 is for Windows, so that means I'm not going to be able to use it on Mac. So it's not going to be able to publish this with this flag. But I can say this, .NET Core, if I remember the flag, it was like a .NET Core app 2.0, and that will work. Okay, so that works. All right, so that was the self framework dependent version. So let's go back and make our application so that we can actually do this self-contained. For some self-contained, you need to have this runtime identifier that simply tells you which target runtimes or which target operating systems that you're going to publish your application for. When you specify this, then you're going to be able to create self-contained published applications in .NET Core. What I'm telling here is that I'm saying runtime identifiers, which is plural, and I am using two operating systems, which is Windows 10, x64, and OS X, which is x64 as well. Of course, the same rule applies here too, and if you just want to have only one operating system defined in this here, you can just remove this runtime identifiers like S from here and just make it singular. And that way you don't have to specify that in your command line. Remember that, before target framework, we didn't have to specify this in our command line command, publish command, but when I converted it to frameworks, then I had to specify which specific target framework that I want to publish my application for in my command line arguments. So let's go back, and I wonder if I save this. Okay, I've saved it. So if I do the same thing, actually, never mind. Let's run this and see how that reacts. Us not specifying which runtime identifier. Great, so it published it. It published it .NET Core 2, but it didn't. I assume it didn't publish. So it didn't use this flag, because you had to have this flag specified in your command line. So let's go back and say runtime R, and I don't see Windows 10. In 10 X, is that x64? x64. All right, so you see that it actually changed where it publishes your application. And if you look at the path here, it says .NET Core App, which is your target framework, and Win 10 x64, which is your target operating system. And so let's look at that place. CD bin release. Okay, so let's see what type of. So we have this bin. All right. So as you see, I have this new program.exe. Well, I can't really run this executable file here, so what I'm going to do, I'll go ahead and execute it, publish it with the flag that is for Mac OS X. So let's go back one more time, and let's see, where am I? CD new program. I'm just going to delete actually this bin directory, so that we can start fresh. So let's say .NET Core, .NET Publish, C release F, .NET Core App 2.0, and runtime is for OS X. That's something I don't remember. Let's look at that. OS X 10.11, x64. Okay, publish. That's my typo there. All right, so I guess we got what we wanted. So let's go there. Bin release .NET Core app OSX. So if you look at that, you'll see new program. I mean, it publishes all DLLs and stuff like that, but it also publishes what we need, which is a new program. So if I'd say new program, you see that I just run it without specifying a DLL or .NET command line. It just runs perfectly. So that's how the publishing works. If you look at if you need more information about publishing, you can always go to .NET publish, and we have this help, which is really great help actually, and it tells you like runtime identifier, publish the project for a given runtime. This is used when creating self-contained deployment. That's important. You don't need to use this when you create framework dependent deployment. Default is to publish a framework dependent app, so that's important. The framework dependent app is the default way of it does things. And we have this configuration to use for building the project. Default for most project is debug, but if you specify release, then it becomes release. We also have this self-contained option here, and that's important. Like it says, publish .NET Core runtime with your application, so the runtime does not need to be installed on the target machine. That's important. But it defaults to true if a runtime identifier specifies. So when you specify the runtime identifier, which is this guy over here, when you define this flag, you don't have to specify this flag because it automatically becomes true. So we have this no restore verbosity. You can of course like change how much information you want to see when publishing happens. And if you change it to like quiet, minimal, normal, detailed, and diagnostic, it usually helps you when you, for instance, like integrate this publishing process as a part of your continuous integration server, and you can like see much more information on the console that you'll see there on the web application, like Jenkins or TFS or whatever you use. Okay, so that's pretty much all, and you can also output everything, all the log and stuff, to an output directory in which to place the published artifacts. Yep. All right, guys, it's pretty much all. What I like about .NET CLI is it is very easy. I mean, if you just read the options, read the help that I just like use the help option here, you'll see that it's pretty easy. There are not so many commands that you need to learn. It's very straightforward. In fact, with .NET Core 2.0, they even do the restoration for you automatically. So if you use a if you use, I think, add, build, and stuff like that, those commands, you don't, and new, of course, like when you create a new project, you don't have to restore your application. That will be happening automatically for you. Unless like, unlike the previous versions, like 1.1 or 1, whatever, you had to run the restore command anytime you add a new package or create a new application and so on. So they simply made it even easier to use. All right, so I hope it's useful, and just leave your comments below if you have any questions, concerns, suggestions. And I'll be doing, I think, more English videos from now on, because I believe that I will be able to reach out to more people if I do my videos in English. So, all right, everyone, take care and see you later.